Ironhold did not believe in subtlety. From orbit, it resembled a patient star wrapped in iron bandages, its continents ribbed with fortress walls, its oceans latticed with defense platforms that drifted like patient sharks. The planet's magnetic field had been engineered to hum at a frequency that interfered pleasantly with hostile targeting systems and unpleasantly with civilian radio, which meant that music on Ironhold was always slightly off-key and invasions were usually discouraged. The citizens had grown used to both. Deep beneath the capital bastion, in a chamber carved from bedrock veined with conductive metals, Princess Aria sat alone with 10,000 lives flickering before her eyes. The chamber was circular, austere, and bright with hovering panes of light. Each pane contained a conscription record, a service history, a pulse of data representing a human or near-human being who had pledged themselves to the defense of the fortress world. The air carried the faint scent of ionized circuitry. When the projection field intensified, it made a sound like distant rainfall. Aria leaned back in her chair, long fingers steepled beneath her chin. At first glance, she might have passed for human. Dark hair bound into a practical braid, high cheekbones, a composure that seemed inherited rather than learned. But her ears, long and elegantly tapered, extended beyond any human proportion, rising from her hair in smooth arcs. They were not decorative. They shifted and angled subtly as she read, responding to the electromagnetic tremors of the data stream around her. Her ears tilted left. "Another one," she murmured. On the nearest pane, Commander Halvek's record rotated slowly. 32 confirmed enemy vessels destroyed, 2 entire pirate flotillas scattered, 5 commendations for valor. Footage of him standing atop a smoking hull, expression carved in triumph, circulated in the public feeds on commemorative days. Aria flicked the pane aside with a small movement of her hand. It dissolved into silver motes. "Impressive," she said to the empty room, "if one's goal is to run out of enemies before one runs out of planets." The chamber did not laugh. It was not programmed to. Ironhold's Defense Council had given her authority to design a new initiative, an adaptive planetary shield system integrating civilian evacuation corridors, predictive fleet redeployments, and AI-guided triage protocols. The next war, the simulations insisted, would not be decided by who fired first, but by who endured longest. Ironhold had always excelled at the first category. Aria preferred the second. She rose from her chair and paced along the ring of projections. As heir to the Illyrian line, descendants of the first deep space colonists who had altered themselves for longevity and neural sensitivity, she had been raised on doctrine and probability. Her tutors had told her that leadership was a matter of choosing the correct variable at the correct moment. They had not mentioned how exhausting it was to choose among heroes. Another pane brightened at her gesture. Captain Jiro Vance. 21 offensive campaigns, 0 retreats. The word relentless appeared in no fewer than 7 evaluations. Her ears twitched, a subtle sign of irritation. 0 retreats, she repeated softly, which suggests 0 evacuations. She enlarged a subfile. Civilian casualty numbers from collateral bombardments scrolled into view. Acceptable losses, the assessments had concluded, strategically negligible. Aria exhaled slowly. The exhale caused a ripple in the projection field. The data shimmered as if embarrassed. In the far corner of the chamber, a maintenance drone drifted in to recalibrate a flickering emitter. It bumped gently into the wall and corrected its course with an indignant chirp. "At least you admit your mistakes," Aria told it. The drone paused mid-air, as if considering the compliment, then resumed its work. She dismissed Vance's record and summoned another at random, more out of defiance than hope. Lieutenant Owen Blake. The name meant nothing to her. His file materialized in a modest pane, smaller than the others, as though even the system had not expected much. His portrait showed a man in the standard issue uniform, expression calm, one corner of his mouth slightly lifted as if suppressing a private joke. A faint crease at his brow suggested either concentration or chronic skepticism. Aria leaned closer. 17 successful extractions from contested zones, 0 casualties. She blinked once. Her ears rose, angling forward. 0 casualties repeated across the screen in tidy rows of data. She expanded the first mission report. Mining colony on the outer moon of Theros. Pirate incursion. Blake had been ordered to hold the docking ring until reinforcements arrived. Instead, he had diverted his squad to escort civilian transports through a maintenance conduit not rated for combat vessels. The conduit had collapsed behind them, sealing the pirates out and nearly trapping his own craft. His closing remark in the report read, "Recommend structural inspection of conduit Gamma 12. Also recommend better coffee in the outpost commissary. Morale may improve by 3.7%. Aria's lips curved. She moved to the second report. Evacuation under meteor bombardment. Blake had deployed decoy beacons to draw hostile fire away from a hospital shuttle, then piloted a damaged escort ship manually when the AI was compromised. 3 commendations had been offered. All 3 declined. She opened the first declination notice. With respect, Blake had written, commendations for standard duty seem inefficient. Please allocate recognition budget to repair civilian housing in Sector 9. Her ears trembled, a sign of something between surprise and admiration. She circled the projection slowly, reading line by line. There were no grand charges into enemy formations, no triumphant declarations over burning wreckage. There were instead footnotes about evacuees reunited with families, requests for improved emergency signage, and a detailed appendix on how to calm children during atmospheric turbulence. Aria stopped pacing. The initiative she envisioned required commanders who could think in layers, who understood that a fortress was not merely walls and cannons, but people breathing within those walls. Ironhold simulations showed that morale collapse preceded structural failure in 72% of modeled invasions. Fear was more corrosive than plasma. She expanded the psychological evaluations attached to Blake's file. Displays high adaptive empathy, one assessment read, prioritizes preservation of life over personal advancement. Another added, almost begrudgingly, exhibits dry humor under extreme stress. Aria allowed herself a soft laugh. Dry humor is a defensive asset, she said aloud, particularly here. The chamber lights dimmed briefly as the planetary shield cycled through a routine calibration. Through the rock above, she could feel the faint vibration of orbital cannons adjusting their alignment. Ironhold was always preparing for a threat that might never arrive. It was both comforting and profoundly tiring. She enlarged the final report in Blake's file, an extraction from the asteroid colony of Kestrel Drift, hostile fleet inbound. Blake had negotiated a temporary ceasefire with a pirate captain by offering safe passage and, Aria checked the transcript again, promising to forward a complaint about unfair trade tariffs to the appropriate interstellar bureau. He had appended a final line to the report, "Victory is only useful if someone is left to enjoy it." The words hovered in the air between her and the projection. Her ears went utterly still. In that stillness, she felt something align, as clean and decisive as the locking of a docking clamp. Strategy and compassion were not opposites. They were sequential steps. Save the people, then save the planet. Or perhaps the other way around. It depended on the hour. She imagined him standing in this chamber, grease on his hands, perhaps blinking at the walls of data. She imagined the defense counsel's expressions if she presented them with this name instead of Halvex or Vance's. A smile spread slowly across her face, not mischievous exactly, but aware of the coming disturbance. The chamber doors hissed open behind her as her chief adjutant entered, breath slightly hurried. "Your Highness, the council convenes in 20 minutes. They request your preliminary selections." Aria did not turn immediately. She was still looking at the line about victory. "Send them this file," she said at last. The adjutant stepped closer, reading the name. His brows rose incrementally. "Lieutenant Blake?" "Yes." "Is this—" He hesitated, searching for a diplomatic word. "A supplementary candidate." Aria faced him fully now. Her long ears lifted with quiet certainty. "No," she said. "This is the one." He swallowed. The council expected a more decorated choice. "Decoration corrodes," she replied lightly. "Ironhold already has enough metal." The adjutant stared at her for a heartbeat longer, then inclined his head. "As you command." He turned to leave. "Wait," Aria added. He paused at the threshold. "Prepare a formal summons," she said, "and notify the ceremonial office. For a commendation, he ventured cautiously. Her gaze returned to the glowing file. For a proposal, she answered. Somewhere high above, an orbital cannon completed its calibration with a resonant hum. In the archive chamber, 10,000 other records dimmed, their data fading into the background like distant stars, while one modest pane remained bright, steady, and unexpectedly gravitational. Lieutenant Owen Blake was lying on his back beneath a shuttle when Destiny arrived in polished boots. He did not recognize it at first. From his current vantage point, the universe consisted of hydraulic lines, a stubborn landing strut, and a maintenance drone that refused to admit it had misaligned the stabilizer coil. The shuttle's belly loomed above him like a judgmental cloud. "If you leak on me again," Owen muttered to the strut, "I'm transferring you to cargo hauling." A thin line of coolant chose that moment to drip directly onto his collar. "Very mature," he added. Around him, the frontier dockyard of Kestrel Gate pulsed with industrial life. Cargo freighters drifted in and out of the docking lanes, guided by traffic beacons that blinked in patient sequence. Beyond the transparent force barrier of the hangar mouth, space shimmered with the pale arc of a distant nebula. It was beautiful in the abstract and inconvenient in practice. The maintenance drone above his head emitted a defensive chirp. "You bumped the emitter," Owen told it. "We talked about this." The drone rotated slightly as if refusing eye contact. He slid out from under the shuttle and sat up, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. His uniform jacket lay discarded nearby, sleeves rolled. He preferred fixing small things when he could. It reminded him that systems, like people, worked better when someone paid attention to their weak points. "Lieutenant Blake." The voice was not from the drone. It carried a certain weight, the kind cultivated by ceremony and practiced diction. Owen looked up to see a man in formal envoy attire standing at the edge of the maintenance bay, flanked by two sentinel drones bearing the sigil of Ironhold. The sigil gleamed, a stylized fortress encircled by a defensive ring. Owen blinked once. Then he glanced over his shoulder, as if perhaps there was another Lieutenant Blake hiding behind the shuttle. The envoy stepped forward, boots clicking lightly against the metal floor. Dock workers nearby slowed their tasks, pretending not to stare while staring with impressive dedication. "Lieutenant Owen Blake?" the envoy repeated. "That depends," Owen replied, pushing himself to his feet. "Is this about the coffee requisitions? Because I maintain that adequate caffeine is a strategic necessity." A ripple of suppressed laughter passed through the dock workers. The envoy's expression did not change, though one corner of his mouth threatened rebellion. "I am authorized to deliver a direct summons from Princess Aria of Ironhold." Owen's hand froze midway to retrieving his jacket. "Princess," he echoed faintly. He had never met royalty. The closest he had come was a ceremonial broadcast thanking outer colonies for continued resilience, which had featured a glimpse of the princess standing beside the defense council. He remembered noticing her ears, long and elegant, angled slightly forward as she listened to a general speak. They had given her a look of perpetual attentiveness. The envoy activated a projection disc. A seal of Ironhold flared into existence between them, followed by a formal script. "Upon review of your service record," the envoy read, "Her Highness Princess Aria declares her intent to appoint you commander of her new planetary defense initiative. Additionally," the envoy paused, perhaps hoping the word would rearrange itself into something less dramatic. "She has stated, quote, 'I will marry this man.'" Silence descended on the dockyard like a dropped wrench. Owen stared at the projection. Then he looked at the envoy. Then he looked at the shuttle. "I think," he said carefully, "you may have the wrong Blake." The dock workers did not bother hiding their laughter now. One of them leaned openly against a cargo crate, grinning. The envoy deactivated the projection. "Your record has been verified. 17 successful extractions, 0 casualties. 3 commendations declined." Owen winced slightly at the mention of the commendations. "In my defense, the housing in Sector 9 was structurally unsound." "That is noted in your file," the envoy replied dryly. Owen ran a hand through his hair, leaving a faint smear of grease near his temple. "With respect, sir, I have never met the princess. That," the envoy said, "is expected to change." The sentinel drones shifted, their optics adjusting, as if assessing the structural integrity of Owen's disbelief. He picked up his jacket slowly. Is this a prank? The envoy regarded him for a long moment. Lieutenant, the royal office does not engage in pranks. Budgetary constraints. Another laugh escaped the dock workers. Owen exhaled through his nose. His mind, trained to analyze hostile vectors and evacuation routes, now attempted to model a scenario in which a fortress-world princess reviewed his reports and concluded that matrimony was the logical outcome. It did not compute. "May I see the authorization code?" he asked, defaulting to procedure. The envoy presented it without offense. The code shimmered with the layered encryption of Ironhold's core command network. Authentic. Owen's stomach performed a maneuver usually reserved for atmospheric turbulence. "Transport departs in 3 hours," the envoy continued. "You are to present yourself aboard the cruiser Resolute Dawn." 3 hours, Owen repeated faintly. He glanced around the dockyard. The shuttle's landing strut still needed recalibration. The maintenance drone was hovering in quiet satisfaction, as if pleased that it would not be blamed for further malfunctions today. One of the dock workers called out, "If you marry into royalty, don't forget us when you're reallocating coffee funds." Owen pointed at him. "I will personally ensure your caffeine supply." The envoy cleared his throat gently. "Lieutenant." "Yes, right." Owen slipped his jacket on, smoothing it as best he could. "If I may ask, did Her Highness provide any context?" The envoy's gaze flickered with something like restrained amusement. "She reviewed your final report from Kestrel Drift." Owen felt heat rise to his face. "The one about the trade tariffs? The one concluding that victory is only useful if someone is left to enjoy it?" Ah, he had written that at 3 in the morning, while subsisting on emergency ration bars that tasted faintly of cardboard ambition. It had not been intended as philosophy. "It was a logistical observation," Owen said weakly. "Her Highness appears to value such observations." The hangar's outer barrier shimmered as a freighter departed, engines flaring bright against the void. For a moment, Owen watched it go. He had built his career on remaining peripheral, arriving where needed, leaving before ceremony could attach itself to his name. Marriage was the opposite of peripheral. "Is this appointment conditional on the other matter?" he asked carefully. "The initiative and the declaration are linked," the envoy replied. "Ironhold marries its future to its defense." "That sounds like something carved into a very large wall," Owen muttered. "It is," the envoy confirmed. Of course it was. Owen squared his shoulders. Whatever this was, it was not a battlefield. Panic would not improve the outcome. "Very well," he said. "I will report to the cruiser." The envoy inclined his head. As the formal party withdrew, the dock workers descended on Owen like a curious flock. "Lieutenant, does this mean we address you as Your Highness now? Will the wedding be orbital or groundside? Can you requisition better pay while you're at it?" Owen raised both hands. "If I start wearing a crown, I give you full permission to stage an intervention." They laughed, clapping him on the back. An hour later, with his belongings packed into a modest case and the shuttle grudgingly repaired, Owen stood at the edge of the docking lane where the Resolute Dawn waited. The cruiser gleamed in Ironhold's colors, its hull lines elegant and severe. Energy fields rippled along its surface like contained lightning. He paused before boarding, looking once more at the chaotic comfort of the dockyard. 17 extractions, 0 casualties. He had thought that would be the extent of his legacy. Now he was being summoned to a fortress world whose magnetic field interfered with music and whose princess apparently made strategic decisions that involved marriage. He shook his head softly. "If this is about the coffee," he murmured to himself, "I'm negotiating." Then he stepped forward into the transport beam, light enveloping him in a clean, humming column. The dockyard vanished. Above Kestrel Gate, the cruiser's engines ignited in a controlled flare. The Resolute Dawn pivoted smoothly toward the distant starfield, toward Ironhold and its iron promises. Inside the vessel, Owen steadied himself against the faint vibration of acceleration. Somewhere ahead of him waited a woman with long, attentive ears, who had read his words and seen something binding within them. He had faced pirate fleets and meteor storms with less uncertainty. 17 extractions, he muttered under his breath. 0 casualties, he exhaled. Let's try to keep it that way. The cruiser entered Ironhold's orbit without fanfare, which was impressive considering that most things entering Ironhold's orbit did so under the close supervision of several thousand weapon systems. Owen stood near the forward viewport of the Resolute Dawn as the fortress world expanded beneath them, a lattice of defense rings encircling continents that gleamed with metallic infrastructure. Even from this distance, he could see the faint shimmer of shield arrays cycling through their diagnostics. "Welcome to Ironhold," the ship's AI intoned pleasantly. "Please refrain from hostile action." "I'll do my best," Owen murmured. A docking corridor extended from one of the orbital bastions, aligning with the cruiser's airlock in a seamless mechanical embrace. The maneuver was precise enough to make his engineer's instincts purr with approval. Ironhold did not improvise when it came to alignment. He checked his reflection in the viewport surface. The grease had been mostly removed. Mostly. He rubbed at a faint smudge near his temple and gave up. When the hatch opened, he was met not by trumpets or banners, but by a corridor of quiet efficiency. Guards in dark armor stood at measured intervals, their helmets bearing the sigil of the fortress world. Their eyes tracked him, not unkindly, but with professional curiosity. He resisted the urge to wave. An adjutant approached, posture impeccable. "Lieutenant Blake, this way, please." Owen followed, boots echoing softly along the polished floor. The bastion interior was a blend of ancient stone and integrated circuitry, as if someone had decided that medieval fortresses and quantum processors belonged together and then refused to compromise. Through narrow observation slits, he glimpsed the planet below, vast and armored. They descended via a grav lift that hummed at a frequency he could almost feel in his teeth. His ears popped slightly as atmospheric pressure adjusted. The adjutant did not comment. "Has Her Highness explained the situation to the council?" Owen ventured. "The council has been informed," the adjutant replied carefully. "That sounds diplomatic." "It is." They emerged into a wide antechamber, where a cluster of officials pretended to study data slates while very obviously studying him. Owen straightened reflexively. He had faced hostile captains with less scrutiny. One official leaned toward another and whispered, not quite softly enough, "That's him?" Owen offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon." The whispering ceased, replaced by a flurry of professional expressions. The adjutant gestured toward a pair of tall doors engraved with Ironhold's sigil. "Her Highness awaits." Owen's pulse ticked up a fraction. He had rehearsed possible greetings during transit. None of them had involved being announced as a future spouse. The doors parted with a low hiss. The chamber beyond was not a throne room. It was a strategic observation deck carved into the inner wall of the bastion, its far side dominated by a panoramic viewport overlooking Ironhold's defensive ring. Holographic projections floated in measured arcs, fleet trajectories, shield harmonics, resource distributions, rotating in calm, luminous silence. At the center of it all stood Princess Aria. She was turned slightly toward the viewport, hands clasped behind her back. Her silhouette was slender, composed. When she turned at the sound of his steps, her long ears caught the light, tapering gracefully above her hair. They moved almost imperceptibly, angling toward him as if adjusting to a new frequency. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Owen saluted, then hesitated. Was that appropriate? He settled for lowering his hand and inclining his head. "Your Highness." "Lieutenant Blake," she replied, her voice steady, resonant. "Welcome to Ironhold." Her gaze was direct, assessing without hostility. He felt oddly as though he were the one being read like a report. "I appreciate the invitation," he said, "though I admit the phrasing was unexpected." A faint curve touched her lips. One ear tilted slightly. "I have been informed that my wording caused ripples. That is one word for it." She gestured lightly and the door sealed behind him. The projections adjusted, dimming marginally as if granting them privacy. "Walk with me." They moved toward the viewport together. Below, the defensive ring glowed faintly, energy conduits tracing its circumference in disciplined arcs. "You have reviewed my record," Owen began. "I have," she confirmed, and concluded that marriage is the logical extension. Her ears flicked, betraying a hint of amusement. "Ironhold binds its future through alliance. I require a commander for my initiative. Tradition binds command to bloodline." "So you solve both variables at once?" "Yes." He considered that. Efficient. That is the intent. They stopped before the viewport. A flotilla of patrol craft drifted past, their hulls reflecting the planet's metallic sheen. I read your report from Kestrel Drift, she continued. You negotiated a ceasefire with pirates by offering to file a complaint regarding trade tariffs. They were very passionate about tariffs, Owen said defensively, and I was outnumbered. You could have engaged and lost civilians in the crossfire. He shrugged. It seemed inefficient. She studied him in profile. You declined 3 commendations. They seem better allocated elsewhere. To housing repairs. Yes. Silence settled briefly between them, not uncomfortable but weighted. You value lives over accolades, she said at last. I value outcomes, he corrected gently. Accolades don't evacuate people. Her ears angled forward, attentive. Ironhold has long valued strength displayed, and you would prefer strength applied. A spark flickered in her eyes. Precisely. He glanced sideways at her. With respect, Your Highness, you could have summoned me for a command review without the additional declaration. Her lips twitched. You object? I am attempting to understand. Understanding is mutual, she replied. You must understand why I chose you. I must understand whether your restraint is conviction or convenience. He folded his arms loosely. If it were convenience, I would have accepted the commendations. A quiet laugh escaped her. It was not regal. It was human. Warm. One of her ears dipped as if embarrassed by its own movement. I see, she said. A projection flared between them at her gesture. Simulations unfolded. Enemy fleets approaching along multiple vectors, civilian population densities lighting up in urgent colors. My initiative, she explained, prioritizes adaptive defense. Shield arrays that flex toward evacuation corridors. Fleet redeployments based on civilian clustering, not territorial pride. He leaned closer to the projection, instinctively analyzing. You're shifting the center of gravity from border to population. Yes. Admirals won't like that. They do not. He nodded slowly. It's sound. Harder to boast about, though. I do not require boasting. He glanced at her ears as they adjusted minutely to the hum of the projection. You require someone who won't flinch when accused of cowardice for choosing evacuation over engagement. I require someone who knows that retreat is not surrender, she said evenly. Their eyes met. Is that why you said you would marry me? He asked quietly. She held his gaze without evasion. Ironhold listens when I speak in absolutes. And this was an absolute. Yes, he exhaled softly. You realize I arrived with grease on my uniform. I noticed, she said, perfectly serious. It suggests practicality. He barked a short laugh. That may be the most diplomatic interpretation available. A subtle chime echoed through the chamber. An alert, low priority. Aria dismissed it with a flick of her fingers. You are unsettled, she observed. I have faced meteor storms with more clarity, he admitted. This is new terrain. Her ears softened, angling slightly back in what he suspected was empathy. New terrain can be mapped, preferably before engagement. Preferably. For a moment they stood side by side, watching the patrol craft complete its arc. Lieutenant, she said finally, I did not choose you for romance. That is reassuring, he replied automatically, then winced. I mean, her laughter interrupted him, light and unforced. The tension in the room eased, as if the fortress itself approved of humor. I chose you, she continued, because you wrote that victory is only useful if someone is left to enjoy it. Ironhold has known many victories. Fewer enjoyments. He considered the planet below, the cannons, the shields, the relentless preparation. You're asking me to help redesign how a fortress thinks, he said. I am asking you to help it remember what it protects. He looked at her fully then, at the intelligence in her gaze, the subtle motion of her long ears attuned to every shift in the room's energy. She was not impulsive. She was deliberate. And the marriage? He asked again, softer this time. She tilted her head slightly. That, she said, is a variable we may solve together. He felt a reluctant smile form. I prefer joint problem solving. Good, she replied. Ironhold does not tolerate unilateral errors. A faint hum resonated through the bastion as the defensive ring completed another cycle. Outside, the stars burned with indifferent brilliance. Owen straightened, the weight of the moment settling into something steadier. "All right," he said. "Show me the worst-case scenario." Her ears lifted, pleased. The projection expanded, simulations multiplying in intricate patterns. Enemy fleets, evacuation routes, shield harmonics shifting in response to unseen threats. They leaned over the light together, two strategists at the edge of a new doctrine, their earlier tension diffused by shared purpose, and the quiet absurdity that somewhere in the formal records of Ironhold. This meeting was already categorized as the beginning of an engagement in more ways than one. The first council session with Owen, present, unfolded like a carefully staged duel in which everyone had brought cannons instead of swords. He stood at the far end of the circular chamber, hands clasped behind his back, while Princess Aria occupied the central dais, faintly pulsing at their temples, faintly pulsing at their temples. Ministers whose expressions suggested they had never once misplaced a document in their lives. Owen felt distinctly underdecorated. Admiral Korvek, whose reputation for decisive orbital bombardment preceded him by several light years, was the first to speak. "Your Highness," he began, voice resonant, "we acknowledge your authority to appoint a commander for the new defense initiative. However, bypassing senior command in favor of a lieutenant with 17 successful extractions and 0 casualties," Aria interjected calmly. Korvek's jaw tightened. "Extraction is not conquest. Conquest," Owen said mildly, "is easier when someone has already secured the exits." A few of the younger strategists suppressed smiles. Korvek did not. Aria's long ears angled forward, attentive but unruffled. "The initiative is not designed for conquest, Admiral. It is designed for endurance." Korvek gestured sharply, summoning a projection. A fleet formation bloomed into existence. Sleek warships aligned in aggressive vectors. Ironhold's strength has always been proactive dominance. We deter invasion by demonstrating overwhelming force. Owen studied the projection. The formation was elegant, symmetrical, lethal. "It's beautiful," he admitted, "but it's also predictable." Korvek's eyes flashed. "Predictability in strength is reassurance. Predictability in deployment is vulnerability," Owen replied. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Aria lifted a hand and the projection shifted. Civilian population densities illuminated the planet's surface in warm clusters of light. Evacuation corridors traced faint arcs between bastions and orbital stations. "This is the axis of the new initiative," she said. "Fleet redeployment based on civilian concentration, shield harmonics that reinforce evacuation lanes rather than border skirmishes." One minister leaned forward. "You propose reallocating primary defense arrays away from outer sectors?" "I propose recalibrating them dynamically," Owen answered. "Static defense invites static thinking." Korvek folded his arms. "And what of honor?" Owen blinked. "I intend to keep it intact, preferably with its civilians attached." A quiet laugh slipped from somewhere in the ring. Arya's lips curved slightly. Her ears flicked in what Owen was beginning to recognize as restrained amusement. "Honor is not diminished by survival," she said. "It is preserved by it." The debate intensified, projections layering over one another, fleet vectors intersecting with evacuation paths, resource allocations recalculated in real time by the chamber's embedded AI. Owen stepped forward when appropriate, outlining contingency scenarios he had refined during transit. "If an enemy fleet approaches from Vector 7, he said, tracing a path through the projection, we feign reinforcement along the outer rim. They commit. Meanwhile, civilian transports shift through Corridor Gamma under reinforced shields. Engagement occurs only after population clearance reaches 98%. 98? Korvek challenged. Ambitious, Owen conceded. I prefer ambitious. A strategist across the chamber tilted her head. Your casualty record suggests you achieve such ambitions. I've had competent teams, he replied, and excellent coffee, on occasion. Even Korvek's stern expression cracked briefly. Aria observed the exchange with measured satisfaction. She did not intervene unnecessarily. She allowed Owen to answer, to deflect tension with humor without undermining gravity. After 2 hours, the council recessed for recalibration. Owen exhaled slowly as the projections dimmed. That went better than expected, he murmured. You were not expelled, Aria agreed. I consider that progress. They moved toward a secondary console overlooking Ironhold's shield arrays. Outside, the defensive ring shimmered as energy cycled through its lattice. You anticipated resistance, he said. Of course. And you still chose this approach. Her gaze remained on the planet below. Ironhold cannot survive the next war by repeating the last one. He nodded. Then we should test the system. She turned to him. A live simulation? Full spectrum, he said. Includes civilian panic variables. Her ears lifted slightly. You are thorough. I've evacuated enough colonies to know that panic spreads faster than plasma. She signaled to the chamber AI. Instantly, the space around them transformed. The viewport darkened, replaced by a high-fidelity combat simulation. Alarm tones echoed. Enemy fleet signatures flared along the periphery. Korvac and several council members re-entered, drawn by the activation. Lieutenant, Korvac said sharply, what is this? Demonstration, Owen replied. Enemy vessels surged toward the outer sectors. Civilian population clusters lit up in urgent red. The simulation's AI began calculating probable casualties under standard doctrine. Standard engagement yields projected civilian loss of 12%, the AI intoned. A faint tension gripped the room. Initiate adaptive protocol, Aria commanded. Shield harmonics shifted, visible as rippling waves across the planet's surface. Fleet formations broke symmetry, redeploying along evacuation corridors. Owen moved through the projection, adjusting variables in quick succession. Divert Squadron Delta to Corridor Gamma, he said. Increase decoy signatures along Vector 7. The AI recalculated. Projected civilian loss reduced to 4%. Korvac's eyes narrowed. At the cost of territorial exposure. Territory can be reclaimed, Owen said. Lives cannot. The simulation escalated. Enemy reinforcements entered from an unexpected vector. Owen swore under his breath. Of course they would, he muttered. No one ever invades according to schedule. Aria's ears angled sharply toward the new threat. Counter? Feigned vulnerability, he replied instantly. Let them believe we are overextended. He adjusted the projection. A portion of the defensive ring dimmed deliberately, creating the illusion of weakness. Several council members stiffened. The enemy fleet committed. Reinforce shields along evacuation corridors now, Owen said. Energy surged through the lattice. Civilian transports slipped through reinforced passages while enemy fire struck decoy arrays. Projected civilian loss, 1%, the AI announced. Silence settled heavily. The simulation concluded with enemy vessels disabled. Their advance stalled without catastrophic collateral damage. Korvac studied the final projection for a long moment. 1%, he said quietly. Owen exhaled. We'll refine it to less. Aria turned to the council. Ironhold's strength is not diminished. It is redirected. Korvac looked from the projection to Owen, then to Aria. You risk appearing weak. Aria's long ears rose, elegant and unyielding. Then let our enemies mistake compassion for weakness. A faint murmur of agreement rippled outward. Korvac inclined his head slowly. Very well. We will proceed with phased integration. Owen allowed himself a small smile. I promise not to requisition excessive coffee. Korvac actually laughed. See that you do not. As the council dispersed, Aria remained beside Owen at the console. You handled them well, she said. I've negotiated with pirates, he replied. Admirals are remarkably similar. Better uniforms. She laughed softly. You diffused tension. I prefer tension diffused. It explodes otherwise. Her gaze softened. You are settling. I'm adapting, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He met her eyes. Settling implies permanence. An adaptation? Survival. A pause lingered between them, charged not with hostility, but with possibility. Beyond the viewport, Ironhold's defensive ring glowed steadily, no longer merely a symbol of aggression, but a dynamic lattice awaiting refinement. Inside the bastion, doctrines shifted incrementally, almost imperceptibly, like tectonic plates adjusting beneath a fortified crust. Owen folded his arms loosely. "You realize," he said, "that if this works, you will be credited with revolutionary doctrine. And you. I'll be content if the casualty numbers trend downward." Her ears angled toward him, a gesture he was beginning to interpret as approval. "Then let us make Ironhold difficult to invade," she said, "preferably for all the right reasons." Together they watched as the shield arrays completed another recalibration cycle, their light reflecting in the viewport like a promise not of conquest, but of preservation. The alert did not arrive dramatically. It did not scream or flash crimson across the sky. It slipped into Ironhold's network as a faint irregularity in deep space telemetry, a distortion in background radiation that did not align with known stellar patterns. Owen noticed it because he was awake. He had taken to reviewing long-range sensor logs before the Bastions shifted from night cycle to operational dawn. The habit came from years of frontier postings where danger preferred inconvenient hours. He stood alone in the strategic observation deck, a mug of tolerable coffee in hand, watching lines of data scroll across a suspended display. "There," he muttered. The distortion pulsed again, subtle, rhythmic. The chamber AR responded to his gesture. "Anomaly detected along vector 12. Probability of natural origin, 23%. "Too low," Owen said. He expanded the feed. The distortion resolved into faint drive signatures, masked within the electromagnetic noise of a nearby nebular current. His jaw tightened. "Wake the princess," he instructed. "I am awake," Aria's voice said behind him. He turned. She stood near the entrance, already in uniform, her long ears angled sharply forward. There was no trace of sleep in her expression, only focus. "You felt it," he said. "I felt the change in the field harmonics," she replied. "Report." He gestured toward the projection. Multiple drive signatures, masked, approaching under cover of radiation drift. Her ears shifted minutely as she absorbed the data. "Hostile? Unlikely to be a trade delegation," he said. She allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Agreed." The chamber lights brightened as the defense council was summoned. Within minutes, projections multiplied across the room. Fleet vectors, shield readiness levels, civilian density maps glowing in warm clusters. Admiral Korvek appeared via hololink, his image sharp and imposing. "Status? Probable hostile fleet along Vector 12, Aria said. "Massed approach. Lieutenant Blake detected the anomaly." Korvek inclined his head once toward Owen. "Numbers?" "Unknown," Owen answered. "Drive signatures suggest at least a dozen capital-class vessels, possibly more in shadow." Korvek's expression hardened. "We engage immediately." Owen shook his head. "Not yet." Every eye in the chamber turned toward him. "They're testing us," he continued. "If we deploy full force now, we confirm detection and reveal our configuration. And if we do not," Korvek demanded, "we let them commit." A tense silence followed. Aria stepped forward. "Adaptive protocol," the AI acknowledged. Shield harmonics began shifting subtly, redistributing energy toward pre-mapped evacuation corridors while maintaining the appearance of standard deployment. Owen moved through the projections, adjusting variables with practiced precision. "Initiate civilian advisory at level 2. No panic alerts. Begin discrete relocation of outer sector populations." A minister hesitated. "Relocation without public explanation may cause unrest." "Better unrest than incineration," Owen replied gently. Aria's ears angled toward the minister. "Frame it as infrastructure maintenance. We are excellent at maintenance." That drew a faint, strained chuckle from someone near the rear of the chamber. Hours passed in careful orchestration. Civilian transports began drifting inward under the guise of scheduled transfers. Fleet squadrons repositioned incrementally, their movements subtle enough to avoid alerting distant sensors. Then the hostile fleet emerged fully from the nebular drift. The projection magnified the image. Sleek, angular warships bearing unfamiliar insignia. Their formation was disciplined, predatory. Korvek swore softly. "They are not pirates." "No," Owen agreed. "They're organized." The enemy fleet accelerated. "Engagement range in 12 minutes, the ARI intoned. Aria's long ears stood almost vertical, attuned to the chamber's shifting energy. "Status of civilian corridors?" 82% clear, Owen replied. We need more time. Time is a luxury, Korvac snapped. Then we buy it, Owen said. He adjusted the projection, dimming a section of the outer defensive ring along Vector 12. Korvac's image sharpened. Explain. We appear underpowered, Owen said. Invite overcommitment. Aria did not hesitate. Authorize. The shield along Vector 12 flickered. Deliberate weakness. The enemy fleet responded instantly, accelerating toward the perceived gap. They're taking the bait, Owen murmured. Energy signatures flared as hostile weapons powered up. Civilian corridors at 91%, the AI reported. Hold, Owen said quietly. The first volley struck the weakened sector. The bastion shuddered. Alarms chimed, controlled but urgent. Korvac's voice cut through the noise. We are sustaining impact. Within tolerance, Owen replied, eyes locked on the data. Another volley. Civilian corridors at 97%. Aria's gaze flicked to him. Almost, he said. The enemy fleet surged forward, committing fully to the breach. Now, Owen commanded. Shield harmonics snapped into alignment. Energy surged across the defensive ring, reinforcing the corridor arcs while collapsing the feigned gap into a concentrated barrier. Enemy ships slammed into the sudden wall of force, their forward momentum disrupted. Simultaneously, Ironhold's fleet redeployed along the evacuation lanes, emerging from concealment in tight formations. Korvac's image flickered with surprise. They're trapped between the ring and our squadrons. Disable, don't destroy, Aria ordered. Precision strikes lanced outward, targeting propulsion arrays and weapon systems. Enemy ships faltered, engines sputtering under focused fire. Civilian corridors clear, the AI announced. Projected civilian loss, 0.8%. Owen exhaled slowly. One enemy cruiser attempted a desperate flank maneuver toward a populated orbital station. Owen swore under his breath. Persistent, aren't they? Aria's ears angled sharply toward the rogue vessel. Counter. Deploy decoy signatures along its trajectory, he said. Make it believe the station house is a fleet battery. The decoys flared brilliantly, mimicking the energy output of heavy artillery. The hostile cruiser adjusted course, firing at the illusion. Ironhold's fleet intercepted it mid-maneuver, disabling its engines with surgical precision. Within minutes, the hostile advance had stalled entirely. Their capital ships drifted in controlled disablement, surrounded but intact. Silence descended on the chamber, except for the steady hum of shield arrays stabilizing. Korvac's projections studied the aftermath. Casualties? Minimal, the AI replied. Primarily structural damage to outer arrays. Civilian impact negligible. Korvac looked at Owen. You risked the ring. I risked metal, Owen said. Not people. A pause, then Korvac nodded once, sharply. Effective. Aria allowed herself a small breath of relief. Her ears relaxed slightly, though they remained attentive. Open communication channel to the hostile fleet, she said. Owen raised an eyebrow. You're going to talk to them? Yes. The channel established. A stern-faced commander appeared on the projection, clearly unsettled by the sudden reversal. You underestimated us, Aria said evenly. The commander's jaw tightened. You feigned weakness. We adapted, Owen corrected gently. The commander hesitated. Your response was restrained. We prefer our victories inhabited, Aria replied. The channel closed. In the aftermath, repair crews mobilized. Civilian transports completed their relocation. The hostile fleet remained disabled, but largely intact, a silent testament to a battle fought without annihilation. Owen leaned back against the console, finally allowing tension to drain from his shoulders. Well, he said softly, that was invigorating. Aria glanced at him. You appear calm. I am deciding whether to request better coffee or hazard pay. She laughed quietly, the sound cutting through the residual tension like light through cloud. Korvac's projection reappeared briefly. Lieutenant? Yes, Admiral? You have altered Ironhold's doctrine. Owen scratched the back of his neck. I prefer to think we refined it. Korvac's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. Continue refining. The projection faded. Aria turned toward the viewport where the disabled enemy vessels drifted against the starfield. You were correct, she said. About? Strength applied. He studied her profile. The elegant line of her long ears now relaxed in the quiet after conflict. "We were correct," he amended. Outside, Ironhold's defensive ring glowed steadily once more, not as a symbol of unyielding aggression, but as a living system that had flexed and held without breaking. Owen lifted his mug, discovering it empty. "Definitely better coffee," he decided. Aria smiled, her ears tilting with amusement. "For a commander who has just preserved a planet," she said, "I believe that can be arranged." The aftermath of a battle on Ironhold did not look like celebration. It looked like recalibration. Across the defensive ring, repair drones moved in disciplined swarms, sealing fractures in shield emitters and replacing scorched armor plates. In the lower sectors, civilian transports returned to their designated docks, their passengers stepping out with the subdued relief of people who had braced for impact and found only turbulence. Owen stood in the central operations deck watching casualty numbers scroll downward into finality. "Confirm again," he said quietly. The AI responded with measured calm. "Total civilian fatalities, 0. Structural casualties limited to non-essential sectors. Military injuries, minor." He exhaled slowly. "0, he repeated as if testing the word for weakness. Behind him, Aria approached without announcing herself. He sensed her presence before he heard her voice, perhaps because the room's ambient field shifted subtly around her, or perhaps because he had grown accustomed to the quiet precision of her movement. "You are verifying," she said. "I prefer numbers twice," he replied. "Once for hope, once for truth." Her long ears angled forward, attentive but softer than during combat. "It is truth." He turned to face her. The tension that had sharpened her features during the engagement had eased, leaving behind something steadier. Not relief exactly, confirmation. "They committed fully," she said. "If we had responded with standard doctrine, we'd be holding memorials," he finished. A faint silence settled between them. Not heavy, just aware. Across the deck, technicians exchanged muted congratulations. One of them attempted to lift a diagnostic panel triumphantly and promptly dropped it on his own foot. The resulting string of inventive curses echoed briefly before dissolving into laughter. Owen smiled faintly. "Morale stable." "Painful, but stable," Aria observed. He stepped closer to the central projection. The disabled hostile fleet still drifted beyond the ring, held in containment fields. Negotiations were underway. Ironhold had chosen not to annihilate them. "That decision," Aria said quietly, "will be debated." "Everything is debated," Owen replied, "especially decisions that don't involve explosions." She tilted her head slightly. "You are not accustomed to this level of scrutiny." "I prefer scrutiny from sensor arrays," he admitted. "They're less judgmental." A corner of her mouth lifted. "You underestimate our counsel. They are only moderately judgmental." He chuckled. The chamber lights dimmed briefly as a status update transmitted across the planetary network. Public feeds displayed a simplified version of events. A hostile incursion repelled, civilian safety ensured. The numbers were clear, 0 fatalities. Owen watched as the feed propagated. "You were right," he said after a moment. "About what?" "Ironhold listens when you speak in absolutes." Her ears shifted, a subtle sign of curiosity. "Explain." "You declared you would marry me before they could object to my rank. It forced them to process the decision differently." Her gaze met his. "It forced them to listen. And now," he continued, gesturing toward the casualty numbers, "they have proof." A small silence followed. "Do you resent it?" she asked. "The declaration?" "Yes." He considered carefully. "I resented the surprise. I do not resent the reason." Her ears angled slightly back, as if bracing for something vulnerable. "The reason being?" "You chose strategy and compassion over spectacle," he said. "That's not a small thing." She studied him, searching perhaps for irony or flattery. She found neither. "You still do not understand why I included marriage," she said softly. "I understand the political calculus," he replied. "I am less certain about the personal variable." Her ears lifted a fraction. "There is a personal variable." He raised an eyebrow. "I suspected as much." They moved toward the viewport overlooking Ironhold's surface. The planet glowed with its usual metallic dignity, shield harmonics stabilizing into their normal rhythm. "When I read your reports," she began, I did not see restraint alone. I saw pattern recognition shaped by empathy. That's a very flattering way to describe stubbornness, he said. You surrendered a strategic outpost for 6 hours, she continued, ignoring the deflection, to allow miners to evacuate. They had families, he said simply. You negotiated with pirates instead of destroying them. They were predictable once you acknowledged their grievances. You declined commendations. They seemed inefficient. Her long ears angled forward, unwavering. You act consistently. That consistency is rare. He leaned against the console, folding his arms loosely. Consistency is easier when your priorities don't shift with applause. She watched him for a long moment. I did not declare marriage solely to bind you to Ironhold, she said at last. I declared it because I trust my instinct. And your instinct says? That your judgment will not fracture under pressure. He held her gaze. It nearly did. But it did not. A technician nearby cleared his throat loudly, pretending to recalibrate a console while very clearly listening. Owen lowered his voice slightly. And if my judgment fails one day? Her answer came without hesitation. Then we correct it. Together. The word lingered. He looked out at the disabled enemy fleet again. They expected annihilation. They will receive terms instead, she replied. That will unsettle them. Good, he laughed softly. You are more formidable than your admirals. My admirals are formidable, she said. They simply prefer volume. And you prefer precision. Yes. A pause. May I ask you something? He said. You may. When you stood in the archive chamber and read my file, did you hesitate? Her ears stilled. For a fraction of a moment, she admitted. Not because of doubt in you, because of the magnitude of deviation from tradition. And then? I calculated the alternative. He smiled faintly. That sounds romantic. It was strategic. Of course. They stood in companionable silence while repair drones completed their final passes along the ring. Across the deck, Admiral Korvek entered without holographic mediation this time. He approached them directly, boots measured against the metal floor. Princess, Lieutenant. Admiral, Aria acknowledged. Korvek glanced at the casualty display. 0. Yes, Owen said. Korvek studied him. Your adaptive protocol held. It flexed, Owen corrected gently. Korvek's stern features shifted into something resembling approval. Ironhold will adopt it permanently. Owen inclined his head. Then Ironhold will be harder to frighten. Korvek's gaze flicked briefly between Owen and Aria. The Council has voted to formalize your joint command. Joint, Owen echoed. You will co-lead the defense initiative, Korvek said. It is unprecedented. Aria's ears lifted. Unprecedented outcomes require unprecedented structure. Korvek nodded once. The formal announcement will include clarification of your union. Owen resisted the urge to wince. Clarification is helpful. Korvek's lips twitched faintly. Indeed. After the Admiral departed, Owen turned to Aria. Joint command, he said. You object? No, he replied. I am adjusting. To permanence, she asked lightly. To adaptation, he said. Her laughter was soft but genuine. Then adapt with me, she said. He considered the fortress world beneath him, the doctrine they had shifted, the lives preserved. I will, he answered. Outside, Ironhold's defensive ring completed another cycle, its light, steady, and precise. The fortress had endured without becoming a weapon of excess. It had bent without breaking. On the operations deck, amid quiet recalibration and technicians arguing amiably over whose diagnostic panel had malfunctioned first, 2 figures stood side by side, no longer merely princess and lieutenant, but architects of a doctrine that valued survival over spectacle. Owen glanced at the empty mug in his hand. You realize, he said thoughtfully, that if this continues, I will expect the coffee to improve proportionally to our success. Aria's long ears tilted in unmistakable amusement. Commander, she said, we can negotiate that term. The sky above Ironhold shimmered like a shield refusing to break. Owen Blake stood at the edge of the upper battlement, hands clasped behind his back, watching the defense lattice ignite in layers of pale blue fire. The planetary grid hummed with the low, patient tone of a machine that had waited too long for a real test. Beyond the atmosphere, the approaching armada unfolded like a bruise spreading across the stars. They do like dramatic entrances, Owen muttered. Beside him, Princess Aria did not blink. Her long ears, elegant and unmistakably not human, curved slightly backward in the high wind. She looked like any woman born on a temperate world. Calm eyes, steady posture, hair bound in a practical braid. But there was something older in the way she watched the fleet, something that measured probability instead of fear. They are attempting intimidation, she said. Statistically inefficient. We already know they are coming. Maybe they rehearsed that formation, Owen said. Would be rude not to admire it. Behind them, officers hurried across the command terrace, hollow screens projecting shifting tactical diagrams into the air. The invading fleet's signature was unmistakable, the Dominion of Karth. Their ships moved with predatory grace, their weapons charged but not yet firing. Aria's new defense initiative, the one that had begun with her scandalous declaration in a records chamber, was about to justify itself. 17 successful extractions, 0 casualties. Owen had not wanted glory. He had wanted people to come home. Aria had seen that in a line of text. Now the entire fortress world balanced on that line. Phase 1? She asked quietly. Owen tapped his wrist console. Civilian shelters sealed, orbital decoys deployed, automated rail cannons tracking, and your speech to the Planetary Council has gone viral again. She tilted her head. The part about marrying you, or the part about responsible defense funding? Hard to say. The algorithm favors romance. A faint smile touched her mouth. Algorithms are sentimental. The first wave of Karth fighters broke from the fleet, diving toward the upper atmosphere. Ironhold's defense lattice flared brighter, catching the initial barrage in a net of controlled energy dispersal. The impact rippled like rain on glass. Owen did not flinch. They're probing. Yes, Aria said. They expect brute retaliation. And instead they get a very carefully worded response, he signaled. The decoy satellites, disguised as supply barges, ignited their drives and scattered. The Karth fighters pursued the largest clusters, only to trigger localized gravity wells that tugged them off formation without tearing them apart. Aria watched the tactical feed. Minimal casualties. On both sides, Owen said. She looked at him then, not as a commander, not as a princess, but as the woman who had once read a file and said, I will marry this man. You still intend to avoid unnecessary deaths, she said. That hasn't changed. Even now? Especially now. Below them, Ironhold's cities remained intact, their domes gleaming, the shelters held. The panic that had once plagued every alert cycle was absent. People trusted the initiative. They trusted the strategy. The second wave came harder. Karth cruisers advanced, their hulls bristling with plasma arrays. Owen exhaled slowly. Time for the part they won't like. He opened a channel. This is Lieutenant Owen Blake of Ironhold Defense, he said, voice steady across the void. Your trajectory intersects with a sovereign world. We request negotiation. The response was a burst of static, then a harsh voice layered with mechanical distortion. Surrender your grid. Submit to Dominion oversight. Aria stepped closer to the transmitter. This is Princess Aria of Ironhold. We decline. Owen added, politely. The Karth fleet answered with concentrated fire. Ironhold's lattice flexed, not shattered. Flexed. Energy surged along hidden conduits beneath the planet's crust. The defense initiative's true innovation activated. Not a weapon of annihilation, but a system of redirection. The incoming plasma streams were siphoned, diffused, converted into stored charge. The planetary grid brightened until the sky resembled dawn at midnight. On the Karth command deck, confusion flickered through intercepted signals. They're feeding us power, Owen said, almost delighted. How generous. Aria's ears angled forward. Return it. The stored energy surged outward in a single focused wave, not to destroy, but to disable. It struck the leading cruisers with precision, overloading weapon systems without breaching life support cores. Ships drifted, stunned, systems offline but crews alive. Silence fell across the tactical displays. One by one, Karth vessels powered down. Owen leaned against the battlement, tension draining from his shoulders. 17 extractions, he murmured. Now one planetary extraction. Aria let out a breath she had been holding since childhood. 0 casualties? On our side, confirmed. On theirs, scanners show containment intact. She closed her eyes briefly. Behind them, the officers erupted into restrained but unmistakable cheers. The defense initiative had worked, not through overwhelming force, but through discipline, restraint, and a refusal to equate victory with destruction. The Karth commander's voice returned, stripped of distortion. We request dialogue. Owen glanced at Aria. See? Politeness. She faced the transmitter. You will withdraw your fleet. You will open diplomatic channels. And you will remember that Ironhold defends without cruelty. A pause. Agreed. The fleet began to retreat. The sky dimmed gradually, the lattice settling into a soft glow. Ironhold had not been broken. It had not been bloodied. It had stood. Owen looked at Aria as the last hostile signature vanished from orbit. You realize one, he said lightly. This is going to make our wedding reception very awkward. She blinked. Why? You just outmaneuvered an interstellar power. Hard to top that with cake. Aria considered this seriously. We can request a larger cake. He laughed then, not from nerves but from something quieter and steadier. Relief, gratitude, pride. Months ago, he had stood in a records chamber confused by a declaration that defied tradition. He had wondered whether her judgment was impulsive, romantic, naive. Now he understood. She had not chosen him because he was fearless. She had chosen him because he feared the wrong things. Wasted lives, needless glory, victories measured in graves. And he had chosen her in return, not because she was a princess, but because she saw strategy where others saw spectacle, compassion where others saw weakness. Ironhold's people began emerging from shelters. Messages flooded the network. Thanks, laughter, someone already composing songs about the princess who married a lieutenant and turned a fortress into a shield. Owen straightened. So, he said, what now, Your Highness? Aria stepped closer, her long ears catching the breeze, her expression no longer burdened by expectation, but illuminated by choice. Now, she said, we build something that does not require war to justify its existence. He nodded slowly. And if someone tries again? She looked up at the peaceful sky. Then we remind them, she said, that strength and mercy are not opposites. Below, Ironhold hummed, not with fear, but with life. Owen realized that somewhere between the 17 extractions and one planetary stand, he had changed. He no longer saw himself as a man avoiding glory. He saw himself as part of a design larger than instinct, a design shaped by a princess who read between the lines of a report and found the future there. He offered her his hand. About that cake, he said. She took it, fingers warm and steady. We will require layers, she replied gravely, for strategic balance. They stood together as Ironhold's suns rose over a world unscarred, the defense grid shimmering softly like a promise kept. And for the first time since her declaration shocked a fortress world, no one questioned her judgment.